mogu pomoći. Srce da volim bližnjeg svoga kao što si mene ti. Ruke da uvek pružam ljubav, noge da brzo nose me. I glas da mogu svima reći da samo ti si spasitelj, spasitelj.
I didn't come ready with all my slides, or else I would have put together something better, but I have some slides here and I'll be able to show you about some experiences. Let me tell you something. Rachel and I used to sit in the church every week, and we just felt like we weren't doing anything. And so we started having a few days of fasting and praying, and we said, Lord, we want to do something. We want to do something for the gospel. We want to do something special. And we prayed, and we started praying, and she was praying on her own, I was praying on my own, thinking, what can we do for God? And a minister came to my house, and for dinner, we've never had a minister visit us, ever. So a visitor, he tells us, I'm coming to see you. So we made a dinner for him, because that's what you do when you're a European, you make the big dinner for the preacher. And he arrives there and there's a big dinner for him, and he asks me, do you want to come on a mission? And I said, to help you? And he said, no, I want you to preach. And I said, but you've never heard me preach. He said, but you lecture at universities, so you know how to speak. So I want you to come and preach. And I was really scared because I didn't have any slides or PowerPoints or anything. And I had to ask some friends, have you got some PowerPoints? And they gave me some, and I had to try and do it. But Rachel said straight away to the minister, he will do it, even though I was scared. And that started our ministry. And we've gone 22 overseas trips. We've done missions in Australia. We've run a fellowship, which is like a mission every month in the town that we lived in. And I'll tell you all about that later too. But yes, and my ministry is called Gospel Talk, and we're taking the message to the world. That's what we want. That's our slogan, taking the word to the world. Okay, miracles do happen, especially in the mission field. Miracles happen. I remember one pastor, he was really worried. His daughter was sick, very, very sick. And in Africa, when somebody's sick, it's not a joke. They could have anything. And I remember that night, I said to him, he was really worried because the girl was really, really sick, feverish, and she was like this. And I said, Pastor, I was anointing people, because sick people, I take oil with me and I anoint them. So I got two elders to pray, and I said, we're going to anoint your daughter. And she, when she got home, I got a phone call from the pastor the next day. He told me she was completely healed. So it was the first time I've seen that kind of miracle. I had never seen that before, where somebody's completely healed. And those sorts of things happen in there. So this is me and Pastor Ngugi in Kenya. He was my translator. And let me just tell you, you make great plans in Australia, but when you get there, they're terrible. Like, I remember I got these banners, these big posters, with pictures of our evangelists and everything. And I paid a lot of money to get it made, And we took there the stick drive, and the pastor said, go and get somebody to make it. He came back, and when I arrived there that evening, they had an old bed sheet, and somebody had drawn on it with the text and the words that I had put there. It was terrible. But this is what they do. That was in Papua New Guinea. In Africa, they're a little better. Their translators aren't very good. Sometimes you just say one word and they speak for 3 minutes. And sometimes you say 3 minutes and they speak for one word, none of it is perfect. Everything is a struggle. This is some of my team. These young men are brothers. They're movie makers. They make movies now for the conference and everything. They're producers. And they do big time. And this man here, I'll tell you all about him later. He was a very famous evangelist, TV evangelist that used to work for T.D. Jakes. And he was converted at one of our missions, and he became an evangelist. I started paying his wages, and he started working for me. And he was the mightiest preacher you've ever heard in your life. He was amazing. Okay, don't worry about me. Just put the pictures up. Don't worry about putting me on the screen, because we're going to use those pictures. Okay, this is a few members of the team as well. That's one of my best friends there on the left. And the man on the right, he works for, what's the organisation? Voice of the Martyrs. He's one of their people. This young man, he went to this mission with me to Kenya. He was telling me how he wanted to work for God full time. He said, but I don't know how I'm going to do it. He's a very spiritual man. And we said, look, let's fast. We were fasting for something else already. Let's fast for your position, that God will give you a job so you can do what you want to do. And he said, Rui, but I've got a mortgage, and I've got to pay my home off, and I've got a wife, and I've got a family. I need to earn $60,000 a year in order to be able to work full time. We said, well, we'll fast and pray for that. We fasted and prayed. And you know, when he came back to Australia, he was offered the job by Voice of Martyrs, which is a Christian, non-denominational organisation that tries and saves people that are in prison for being a Christian. And they also take Bibles into countries where they don't allow anybody to take Bibles. He's been made one of their managers. Now, you know what his job is now? On Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon, he goes to 2 churches. It can be Protestant churches, it can be Anglican churches, and he's allowed to preach whatever he wants because he works for Voice of the Martyr. Imagine being paid by an organisation to preach the Adventist message to other people from other churches. That's what he does. So God's still in the business of doing miracles. This is one of our posters, Mystery of the Future. We do that. That works really well in Africa. They love to know about the future. So we use something like this, Mystery of the Future. And let me tell you, the worst thing in evangelism in Africa is waiting. You have to wait. If you have no patience, go home. Because we arrive there at about 5 o'clock so they can do the mic check and everything. And then they sing for 2, sometimes 3 hours. They sing and sing and sing. When I'm finished in Africa, I come home and I just say, I just don't want to hear any music because I'm all musiced out, okay? And the choirs just sing. Sometimes you have 6, 7 choirs and they do 2, 3 songs each, and then they have congregational singing. Africans love to sing. And you just get tired. I remember one baptism, I'll show you later, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So waiting is the worst time. Was very fortunate, this one, because we had cover on us. But sometimes we have to wait, 2, 3 hours in the sun, in hot African sun. And you have to wear a suit, because if you don't wear a suit, they don't let you get up and speak. They tell you, in Kenya, they tell you, go put your suit on or else you don't speak. So we're sitting there cooking in the sun. So by the time you get up, sometimes it's really something. But, that man on my left is, Dr. Robert. I've skipped a few. He used to organise all my missions there in Kenya. He's Dr. Robert Tanega. He's a nice enough man. They're all nice. Just don't trust them with money. Don't send your money up front, and they're all nice people. This is what they usually build for you. They build you a stage, and you speak out of that stage. And on there, behind that, they've got the sound desk. And behind that, there's usually 20, 30 people praying while you're speaking. And that is the secret to their success. They pray while you speak. I've had one, I'll show you one later on, where we're in the air, and I had floorboards on the ground and gaps, and I would see 30 people on their knees while I'm speaking. On their knees the whole time. You know, these people are godly people. They want to see soul winning, you know, and that's the secret of them. But they make these beautiful huts for you so that you can speak. And at night it's good because sometimes you get rain and the people don't go. But so this is typically what it looks like. This is a typical gathering. You're out in the open. Some people have a bit of a tent if it's a church that brings their own tent. Otherwise, they sit out in the open. And you're preaching to all sorts of people. In this particular place, this was my first mission. We had many, many Muslims. The ladies with the Muslim hats, I'll show you in a minute. And when you see a crowd like that and it's your first mission, you start to tremble, you know. You're a bit scared and everything. You're excited but scared. You know that halfway line between excited and scared? You know that God has brought you here. You know that he wants you to do this, but you're scared. And they have speakers that you can hear like 2 kilometres down the road. So people, when you make an appeal, sometimes you may have only like 500 people here, but when you make an appeal, you see 700-800 people join the group. They're hearing from their homes and everything. I want to tell you about this day. Now, I kind of told this story the other day, but for any of you who weren't here, this is my first mission. I'm terrified. I hate getting in planes. I'm terrified of planes. I get in a plane and fly over because God wants me there. I've been asked. I didn't volunteer. I've been asked. So I get there and I'm ready to speak. I've got my PowerPoints. I feel like I'm ready. And the rain comes down and all those people go home. And I'm devastated. My first mission. Devastated. I go back to the motel room. I spend the night talking to God, agonizing. Is it me? Is it my life that's not right? Is it something that I've done? Is my past not clean? You know, I asked all the questions because I wanted to know that it wasn't me, that it wasn't me that was causing this. I felt like Jonah, you know, the ship's about to sink and I'm responsible for it. So I go the second day, God assures me that everything's okay. I get the sense that God is with me. I prepare hard at this time. I spent hours praying. I get over there. The same thing happens. God washes everybody out 10 minutes before the sermon starts. This happens 3 times. 3 times. The rain just comes and goes. On the 4th night, I was tired of arguing with God. And I just said, Lord, whatever happens, happens. I'm ready to be used or not to be used at all. If you choose not to use me, that's okay. I'm not going to fight anymore. And that day, I came and, you know, I had a rainbow over the ground. I've got those pictures somewhere at home. And there was a rainbow over the ground and I preached on the Sabbath truth. And I want you to just notice something. You notice some of the people there like Muslim ladies and all that. I have another slide there. You can see the Muslim ladies with the stuff on their hands. Those people we had to baptize in secret. We can't baptize them in the open. Because if you baptize them in the open, they'll be dead the next day. So we had all these people. It was my first mission. 640 people decided to be baptized. And I was so moved that I came home and I said to Rachel, we've got to just keep doing this. We just got to do this. It was, you know, sometimes we think a life with God is boring, but a life with God is not boring. God has taken me to places in the world. I've spoken in areas. I've spoken in prisons. I've spoken in universities. I've spoken in chambers of commerce. He's taken me everywhere. And we've had some of the most wonderful things. But the most exciting day in Africa is the day of the baptism. Churches come from all around. They have their tickets saying that they've fulfilled the criteria for baptism. We give a call there and say, who's getting baptized? They put their cards in the air and then they fill the pools. And you know, it's really funny because when the first people get in the pool, the water's clean. But they're walking through mud and everything. By the time the 300th or 400th person gets in, it's just brown mud. And it's just so funny. as you can see, there's a lot of people getting baptised there. I think we baptised 850 people all up, but 600 from my site, which was really exciting because it was just an amazing time. And there were some wonderful people that we baptised, a lot of young people. Yeah, there you are, 940 people got baptised. Look at the colour of the water now. Afterwards, they were all baptised. Hey, how would you like to go in that water? This was one of the men that was converted at my site. This pastor was Fred Mazungu. He was a Pentecostal pastor that had 17 churches. And we removed him from, once he keeps the Sabbath, the churches don't want him anymore. So now he's without a wage and without a church. So I took him on and he became my evangelist. So it sounds like a big deal, but I think his wages are about $1,700 a year. So I was paying $1,700 and he was employed full-time for me, winning souls. And his job was to go back and get as many Pentecostals out of his church and rescue them and bring them to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So he became an instant soul winner. This is Samuel Knuthia. This is that mighty pastor that was T.D. Jake's assistant. He was converted. You know, this man is such a powerful man. I went to a funeral with him. Okay, he was running a mission up the road. He was one of my evangelists. I went to a mission with him, and he ran a funeral. Somebody asked him to do a funeral. You know, he's a Pentecostal who believes in a Sabbath and believes our doctrine. So he's got that Pentecostal fire, but the Adventist message. And he went to this funeral and he preached on the state of the dead. And he told people about you know, what happens when you die. And then he ran this funeral. You know, he got so many people, hundreds of people that night to come to his mission. He said, I'll be finishing this sermon up there in a mission. And he called those people. And he literally has won hundreds of people to the church for me. You know, I employed him as well. He was one of my employees. And he was the most amazing human being you'll ever see. The most fearless man I've ever seen. You know, he, one of the conference presidents, I've got to tell you this story. He's won all these people, and the conference president, because he wasn't an official Adventist minister. He had only been converted to Adventism about a year earlier. They said to him, brother, I hope you're not going to baptize anybody. And he said, why is that? She goes, because you are not ordained. And there was like 10 Adventist pastors and a conference president, the union president. He said, now listen here. He said, I'm ordained of God. I don't know who ordained you. I'm not sure that you're ordained of God, but I am ordained of God. If I want to go and baptize those people, I will. But out of respect, I will not be baptizing any day today. He said, you can go into the water and get the glory. That's what he said to them. He's fearless. And everybody knows that this man is a righteous man and he's a godly man and he's not scared to speak the truth. So he was just a wonderful man that I met, and I loved him. He died a few years ago, which was really sad. This was another old Pentecostal minister that was baptized in one of my missions, Pastor Wajama. And he looked like we were never going to get him over the line. Every night he came and asked me questions. Every night he said, I'm not sure that this is true. And yet when it came to Friday night, something touched him when I presented the cross of Christ, and he decided to be baptized. 73 years old, and being a Pentecostal minister all his life, and he decided to accept the Sabbath and become a Seventh-day Adventist. So that was just 3 Pentecostal ministers that were converted in our mission there. This was a mission in Kibera. This is one of the biggest slums in the world. I'm about to show you what that slum looks like. 2 million people in there. Have a look at how they live. And most of them are Muslims. 2 million people in a small area. They have no running water. To get water, they all have little bicycles, and they put these cans on both sides, and they go far away and get this water and bring it down to there. And there's an Adventist church in there. A big, beautiful Adventist church in that slum, which is really, really crazy. Have a look at some of the sheds that they've got there. That's how they live. 2 million people in there. I want you to show you some of the roads down to there. I used to walk down that road. By the way, this here, that water running, that's not water. That's human excrement. That's toilet water. And we had to wear gum boots to walk in there. I used to take my shoes in my hands, and I wasn't allowed to carry my equipment, my data projector and my computer, because they would kill me for it. So we had to walk in, and people live in those conditions. You remember that today I told you about poverty? That's houses. People live in those. You know? We sit comfortably in our home. People live in those things. And that's the road that we walk down. Like I said, that's rubbish from people's toilets that runs down the street. And we had to walk through there, and then they were my 2 guardian angels. I had to walk in with 2 guys with machine guns, with guns. They escorted me in because somebody had died. And you know, I'll tell you something beautiful. The first night I walked in, well, that man there, he came and got me and said, please, come here. And he said, when you got a gun and you tell me come here, you obey. And you talk very nicely to them. And I thought, what are they going to do? Maybe they're going to want some money or a bribe. I walk into this room and there's like 30 guns on the ground. And I thought, what's going on here? Then about 30 cops, soldiers appear. And they said, can you pray for us? We hear that you're a man of God. Can you pray for us? Because we're scared. A few of our colleagues have been killed in this slum and we're running scared and we'd like God's protection. So I'm sitting here with my arms around these people every night. Every night that I was there, I'd go there and we got like 30 guns and machine guns in the middle of us. And there we are praying around all these guns, praying for the safety of these people. And I'm sitting there going, what a crazy ride this is. So we run our missions with the translators. As you can see, we wear a tie even in the slum, which is really strange. They expect you to do that there. And we had some people, of course, when we make appeals, people put their hands in the air, and we had a baptism there as well in a slum. Let me tell you, when you have 2 million Muslims and you have a baptism, there's a lot of people watching. And that's where the biggest draw card is for next time when you run a mission, that they've seen the baptism. They want to know what it's all about, and they hear the sermon. You know, you're preaching to thousands and thousands of people on that day, the sermon. And you always make an appeal in one of those places, because sometimes in that day, you make an appeal and people decide to give their lives to God. And we had lots of Muslim people there baptized at that time. This is another one that we did. This was a big one, and this one there was a lot of pressure because this was only my 2nd or 3rd crusade, but Hope Channel was filming it, and it was going to go all over Africa. So they told me, look, this is going to go out to millions of people. Make sure that you're sharp and everything works well, and that's a lot of pressure for a 3rd-time evangelist. But anyway, these poor people here, it was in an old market, an old open place, and there was a lot of people there. We could only film, I only had a cheap little phone, we could only film a little bit at a time, but there was people everywhere. And they sat there and they listened to the first message, which was about family life. Some lady speaks on, she didn't speak, she yells. They yell. She yelled about family life. Then we had somebody who spoke about health, a nurse, about health message. And then we had the singing that went for about half an hour, and then I get up to speak. And these poor people put up with it. Even when it was raining, they had their umbrellas. You can see them there. Some had umbrellas, some just waited in the rain. And there was lots of Muslim ladies there as well. And we preached every night, rain, hail or shine, we just have to preach. And then on the day of the baptism, there was some serious people there. They tell me there was around 5,000 people there that day. They were just everywhere, people. And they weren't necessarily Adventists. There was people from all walks of life. And we were preaching to those people. This day, they started singing. Now, get this. They started singing at about 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay? 8 o'clock in the morning. We arrived there at about 10, because I'm only speaking there supposedly at 12. They're still singing at 12:30. And I finally get up to speak the baptismal sermon at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Then after the 1 o'clock sermon, we go off to the baptism, don't we? We eat something and go off to the baptism. They're still singing. We go to the baptism. We arrived back from the baptism, because it was a big baptism, about 7 o'clock. Guess what they're doing? Still singing. And you wonder why when I come home, all I want is peace. I don't want to hear any music anymore. These people can sing. They sing beautifully, don't get me wrong. They've got harmonies and everything. But it's just how many hours of singing can you do? So this was the day. I think you can see the cameras there from Hope Channel. They filmed the whole thing. And then I was asked to go to this place. And I saw these big lines that went like a snake all through the bush. And because our appeals are made at night, we started about 7 o'clock at night. You don't know how many people have come forward and have said, yes, they want to be baptized. So I went over there and I asked the pastor, what are these lines? He said, they're the people getting baptized. And I went, what? And I saw them, and there was like 1 kilometre long of lines. And those people, that's why the baptism took about 6 hours. There was like 2,000 people being baptized that day. And I was just blown away. This is you remember that thing that I showed you there? Hold on. This thing is up in the air, and they had all the people underneath praying for us. That was the one where all the people were praying for us. And the sheer amount of prayer and the sheer commitment, and we got that big line of people, and they went all the way down to the river, all these people waiting to be baptized. And they blocked the river, as you can see, they blocked the river, and they get enough water to baptize people. And sometimes in those rivers there's crocodiles. I just can't get my head around being baptized in a place where there may be crocodiles. But anyway, they were baptized, but we couldn't baptize all the people there. We had to go to another river, and there you see some people were baptized in that river. But yes, just have a look at that crowd, because that was amazing. That was a wonderful, and we got 2,229 baptisms that day. It was the most incredible mission ever. It was just one of those things that you never ever forget. And the two young men that were with me, they learned to be evangelists on that trip, because they had tried before, but this time they were kicking goals. And they each got 300 or 400 people in their sight to make decisions for God. So that's one thing we do. We always take young men with them. So it might be Avondale students, might be people that are learning to be ministers. And we take them with them so we can teach them how to do evangelism. In the morning, they go through their presentations in front of me and show me what they're going to do. I just tell them, look, work here, work this, just change this, make your appeal here. And at night, they speak on their own sites. So we're training evangelists so they can do their own work. Some of the great people you meet, this is called the Chief Justice of Kenya, David Maraga. David is the High Court judge, the biggest judge in Africa. You know this man, the politicians fear him because he's a righteous man. He's like Daniel. You know, when the Parliament was dissolved, they needed the Chief Justice to make a ruling on whether we're going to have another election or not, and it was Sabbath. And all the journos gather outside his house, and he said, I'm not going to do anything today. This is my Sabbath. This is God's holy day. And all the journos, they went away and came back the next day. And then he made the ruling. This is a man that everybody regards as a holy man, and yet he's the best advertisement for Seventh-day Adventism there are. He's given me a gift for our work in Kenya, and he said to me, whenever you come, next time you bring your wife, and I will have my chauffeur you around Kenya and take you to wherever you want, and we'll organise all the motels and everything for you. He said, we'll look after you because of the work that you've done for Kenya. He said, I've got to do something for you. He's such a wonderful man. He sat with me 2 hours for dinner, and we just talked, and he's just a beautiful person. We have lots of fun too. It's not all serious. We do a lot of laughs. The boys play jokes on me all the time, you know, when I'm asleep or something. They're always playing jokes and everything. So we have lots of fun. We make sure that we don't, you know, that in God's work, it's not all just, you know, doom and gloom, but we have lots of fun. And these boys have been wonderful in that regard. Over there on the left, I was asked to speak at a what are they called? They're a Pentecostal group, and they worship outside. They don't worship indoors. And they wear white robes, so they made us wear white robes. Now, I was laughing at one of the boys, that one there, Jared, because he was the guest speaker that day. And I was laughing at him when I saw him come out with white robes. And the next thing, the ladies come and give us white robes. We have to put them on. So that's why we're sitting there laughing, because we're dressed in white Pentecostal robes. And we've spoken in Pentecostal churches. I remember in Swaziland, there was one man there who saw my poster, and he telephoned me. His minister had just had an affair with one of the young girls in the Pentecostal church, and he had a church full of thousands of people, and he said, I don't know what to preach. Can you come and preach in my church? Man, that's every Adventist's dream, isn't it? You know, thousands of people waiting for you. I arrived there. They were all talking in tongues. There were people falling over me. There was just, the whole place was in chaos. And I'm sitting there praying, Lord, if you want me to speak here, we're going to have to quieten this place down. And I got up, my translator's the pastor, and I'm not speaking. I'm just sitting there quietly while they're still talking in tongues and doing the whole thing. I just sat there quietly. When they all stopped, I bent down and prayed. And then I preached on, you know, people that come to Jesus and they say, Lord, Lord, in your name we've done this, in your name. And I said, in your name I've spoken in tongues, in your name. Because they believe that prophesying is speaking in tongues. And Matthew says, in your name we've prophesied. I said, these people spoke in tongues. And I spoke about him, and then he said, I never knew you. So I spoke about authentic religion, which is not speaking in tongues. It's authentic religion is a heartfelt appreciation for the love of God. And I preached a big sermon. The pastor came out and he said, can you come and preach again tomorrow? I said, brother, tomorrow's Sabbath. I'm going to be preaching at an Adventist church. He said, it's all right. We'll change our congregation for the afternoon. You come here again and you preach again. And he wanted me to run a mission, an Adventist mission inside his Pentecostal church to convert his people. So there are people out there that are honest, and they just don't know where to turn. And these people were honest. Oh, can you get me that? We had the most interesting crusade was one in Namibia. Namibia is that country where the people click, you know, the little men, they don't talk, they click like that. And they are little men, but they're savages. They kill people. They get great joy out of inviting missionaries into their villages and pretending that they're friends, and then they spear them. You know, they killed so many missionaries. Anyway, we were in Namibia, and I thought when you go, and they've made a request, the conference president has made a request for me to come there, and I thought when you go, everybody wants you there. You would think that, wouldn't you? I get there, and the minister calls me aside and says, I don't want you here. And I thought, wow, that's really bad. Because I'm thinking, who's going to help me then? So I literally had to go and get posters. And there was an old conference president, and I spoke to him, and I gave him, I take stick drives with me and equip young men with PowerPoints and everything so they can do their missions. And I gave this old conference president a set of PowerPoints so he could run evangelism. And he befriended me, and I said to him, Pastor, what am I going to do? The local pastor doesn't want me here. He's probably spoken to people here. They're going to make life very difficult for me. He said, look, I will book a venue for you, but I won't, you don't know me. You don't know that I'm involved, and I'll book everything for you. I'll organise everything in the background. And you do the advertising. So every day I'd be going out with posters, putting them all over the trees and all over the roads and everything. I did that for 3 or 4 days because Nobody was going to come to a mission that they didn't know. Anyway, we started off and the mission was quite slow. We had about 200 people to start off with. And I made appeals, and when I'm in trouble, that's when I get really fired up. And I got fired up and really started speaking and preaching. And the next day there was 300, and the day afterwards there was 400 or 500. And then by the time I finished, we had like 2,000 people in there. So God showed me that it doesn't matter what forces are put against you. If you're committed and you come there to do his work, he'll look after you. And have a look at the number of people that were in there. And then the conference president and all of them had to come on Sabbath and acknowledge that this was a thing of God, and they came there and they said, oh, we're so happy that this man came here to baptize these people and to win these people over. And they're sitting there on a stage. These are the people that told me to go home. They didn't want me there. So sometimes everything seems against you, but God had his angel there, that old conference president, and he helped me there. So not all the time are we welcome in places. Sometimes we're an embarrassment to the local minister because he doesn't want to do missionary work. He doesn't want to get involved. I've been to Papua New Guinea too. That was a very interesting place. I spoke mostly in the dark. They had no lights. The beautiful thing was these ladies underneath the stage praying the whole time we were speaking. These dear old mothers, were underneath the stage just praying, and I took a photo of them. I said, can I please take a photo? They were very shy, but they said yes. And this was in Lay. We got some baptisms there as well, 425. But I want to tell you about it. People think, you've done it overseas. I've done it in Italy, Spain, Romania, in other countries, even in the US. I've done one via Zoom during COVID, and we got quite a few baptisms there too. But where we lived, where Rachel was the doctor, we had the people in town, and we said, we need to do something here. And they have a private hall there, a Scouts hall. Is it a Scouts? School of Arts, that's right. And we decided we were going to do evangelism there once a month. So we called it, the place is called Bulladila, that's where she works. And we called it Bulladila Fellowship. We don't need to put Seventh-day Adventist up. They know we're Seventh-day Adventists. But if we put Bulladila Fellowship, it means that everybody's welcome, doesn't it? Because it's for the people of Bulladila. So we thought we were going to get a few here and there. We got 140 people coming. Can I tell you that 5 Pentecostal ministers used to attend every month and 1 Mormon minister? I prayed with a Mormon minister when he was dying. He didn't trust anybody else to pray with him. I used to go there and pray with this man and share with him faith, because he used to ask me to share my knowledge of Jesus with him. And we had 5 Pentecostal ministers who used to attend, and it was really funny because they would amen, all through the presentations, and all these other people, they're just from the town. They're people that would never go to church, but they're happy to come to a meeting because it's not church. And that's one thing that I need to convey to you, that when you run a mission, the best place to run it is in neutral ground. People are scared of churches. In Australia, people are scared of churches. They don't come near churches. In a public hall, you have much more chance of success. So we had people coming. These are typically the kind of people. We would have some singing, we'd have a message, and then we'd have prayer, and then we'd have a meal together. And we did this for 4 years. And we constantly had a big crowd coming. Sorry. What'd you say? Yeah, I think I will. Oh, what happened there? Okay. Okay, they're the people. As you can see, there's the singers up the front. We get people to lead the singing, and then we have these meetings. And it works in Australia. You can win souls in Australia. People say you can't. We decided to do a Christmas concert in town and bring some Adventists. We had 550 people attend the Christmas concert. And I gave a message at the Christmas concert. And you know what? When the Lions Club heard that we were doing a Christmas show, guess what? They came and did a barbecue, a sausage sizzle for us. And the firemen got dressed as Santa Claus because it was Christmas and came and gave kids the lollies and everything to the kids. So it was the most, people said to me it was the most amazing day they had in this little town. There's only 1,200 people in that town and 550 came. That means 1 in every 2 people were there. So things can happen in Australia as well. So I'll tell you a summary of what we've done in 12 years. We've done 21 or 22 overseas evangelistic campaigns: Romania, Spain, Italy, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Namibia, Tanzania, Philippines, PNG, and the US. We've had over 24,000 baptisms. We employ evangelists currently in Kenya, in Zimbabwe. I've got 21 in Uganda. In the Philippines, in Pakistan and India, they're all working for us and running evangelistic crusades. And we run campaigns in Australia now for the last 2 years. And can I just say that God has blessed us. We've never asked for a cent from anybody. And God has always given us the money to pay for those ministers, to run our crusades. We've never asked for a cent. We've always used our own money. And God has blessed us. We've never lost with God. We're always in front. God provides the work for you, and He blesses you accordingly. And to God be the glory. It's a ride. We sometimes I wake up and I think about some of the things that have happened in the last 10 years, 12 years, and I scarcely believe what God has done in our lives and for us. And my challenge to you is make yourself available. God will open doors for you. He'll bring you people that you can talk to. And thank you for listening to us. That's my small presentation. And I think Rachel now wants to talk to you about herbs. Just a couple of minutes. Do you have any questions you want to ask about our missions or anything? I'll be happy to answer them for you. No questions? There is a question. Yes, brother.
Do you feel any scare between so many people?
Oh, yeah. Do I feel scared? All the time. When I go, at the end of my missions, this is what I didn't tell you, where we get most of our success is not actually in the preaching. It's after every mission, after every night, I make an appeal to people, and when they come forward, then I say to them, does anybody want me to pray for you? If you're sick, come forward, we'll anoint you. If you have need of prayer, if you're struggling with certain sins, if your life is ruined and you'd like God to reshape your life. And sometimes we spend 2-3 hours praying with people all over the place. That's a bit scary because the lights are off and you're in a big crowd with people in a dark and you don't know who they are. And there's Muslim people everywhere, and Muslim people can take your life out very quickly at any given time because they don't want you there. So, yes, I do. I'm human, I feel scared. But you know what? I'm more scared of letting people go to hell than I am to, we've got to do this. We've got to remember that God is on our side. And it was God who called me. I didn't ask to do this work. God called me to it. So therefore, I have to rely on Him to keep me safe. My biggest fear is getting on planes. Every time I get on planes, I don't like them at all. And yet, those 21 trips, I figured out that I've had about 60 plane rides in those 21 things, 60 or 62. And I hate them. Every time I can't sleep in them, so I'm awake for 24 hours. It's terrible. It takes me 2 days when I get there. I usually arrive on Thursday, and I have to try and get some sleep on Thursday and Friday because I haven't slept. So yes, I get scared all the time. And Rachel gets scared for me being out there and some of the places we've been to. Yes, very much so.
Just to explain why do I ask, because if people with the guns ask you to pray for them, they won't.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When a set of policemen ask you, and by the way, do you know when I was running their campaign, they were scared that they don't want an international person being gunned down in a slum. So they sent a helicopter. There was a helicopter flying over the site every 15 minutes. The helicopter came. So I was running this mission. I had to stop every 15 minutes while the helicopter circled and went. Yeah, we've had those things happen everywhere. Yeah, we get scared. You wouldn't be human if you didn't get scared. But I just got to tell you one more thing. I went to a prison one Saturday morning. No, it wasn't a Saturday morning, it was Saturday afternoon. And the man from the prison said, have you come here to preach? And I said, if that's what you want me to do. And he said, please. He said, if you preach and you make these people Christians, I never have to worry about them anymore. They're not going to get a gun and shoot me. So he had all these guys there, and 3 or 4 men came up to me and they said, we're Adventists. I thought, what's an Adventist doing in jail? But they were in jail. One of them had killed people, but he was an Adventist when he was a little boy. But he had started a Sabbath school in that jail. Imagine a murderer starting a Sabbath school. I went in there and they decided they were going to sing for me. This was a Sabbath afternoon. And you have 3,000 prisoners singing, How Great Thou Art. I have never, ever in my life heard a congregation like that. They were all in orange overalls and they're singing and they're crying. And I did a presentation called The God of Second Chances. The God gives people second chances. And these brothers were crying. They were on their knees. They were praying. They were saying, please, please, pray for us. And then I said, what can I do for you? I can pray, but what else can I do? They said, please, get us 200 Bibles in this prison so we can give Bible studies and convert these people. And we went, I phoned up people in Nairobi. They bought up 200 Bibles overnight. And the next day I went to prison again, the same thing. They're singing for me. We preached again. And these people were just, it was the most amazing congregation, let me tell you. There was better response from hardened. This was a maximum security jail. And there was more response from hardened criminals than I get from some Seventh-day Adventist churches that I go to. A greater response. These people knew that they were sinners. They knew that they needed to be saved. And so we were able to reach their hearts. And it was the most amazing thing to hear those people. You know, I just cried. I just cried. As they were singing, I just cried. I could hardly stand up to speak. I had to wait about 3 or 4 minutes before I could get up and speak. I've never seen anything like that. God's wonderful, the things that he does with people and to people and for people. Okay.
All right, can you all hear me? Okay, let me know if my voice disappears. I'll change the microphone. So just before I start, I just wanted to go over a little model that I put together for herbs and where they fit in a more holistic picture of medicine. So one thing that I have realised, of course, in my latter years of practicing is that there is a true method of healing and then there's a false. Not to say that everything that you get from modern doctors is a false method, but if we are just managing people in their disease state and not trying to restore their health, and that is a false health message. So our job as physicians should be trying to help people restore their health. And so what I did is actually put together that little model, and we all like pyramids, we all like these schematic diagrams. So down the bottom, you've got the biggest category should be educating getting people to learn about their physiology and how they can use, their lifestyles and some simple remedies to restore their health. And of course, you got then the next part of the tier is actually implementing them in their lives, or implementing these things, making sure they have a healthy lifestyle that's both preventative and restorative. And then as you move up from there, you get some interventional stuff. So in that's where the herbs would fit. So herbs, supplements, you're talking about, seeing physiotherapists, speech therapists, all these things who give you natural ways to restore your health. Then you go up to the medicines. So these are the pharmaceuticals, using tablets, those sorts of things. There's still a place for that. We still do need at times to use medications, and of course surgery as well. So that's my little pyramid. It's not a perfect representation, but I think that gives us a better picture. And look, God has blessed every level of that tier. He does bless the surgeon's hands. He does bless the physicians who are trying to save lives. So it's not about trying to say that the whole profession is evil and wrong, rather that there's a place for all of us. But one thing that we have lost sight of a lot in the last several decades is that we've lost that health message of restoration. What we can do naturally, how can we restore our lifestyles, and what natural means can we use to help us with some of the chronic diseases that we've got. So that's where it fits, and that's where I just wanted to explain how that all came about and where I sit with how I understand medicine to be these days. So plants and medicine, I just want to do a little bit of a history before we go into growing plants and what we can do with them. So there's a huge, long history since time began, really, that we've been using plants for healing. Certainly we know from the Bible itself, there's plenty of examples where they were used as part of the diet, and certainly examples of where it's healing. Even in Revelation, we know that the Holy City will have that tree of life that will bear its fruit each month that we'll be eating to keep us going, but they also have leaves that will be for the healing of the nations. So the Bible is clear that this is a nice method of healing. Certainly traditional Chinese medicine, the Indian Ayurvedic medicine, they've used herbs for thousands of years. Western and European medicine, we have also been using herbs for a very long time. And in fact, prior to modern medications, pharmaceuticals, this was what we used. We used plants predominantly for healing. And at this point in time, we know that at least 70% of our medications actually are derived from natural sources such as plants. So we use these plants, albeit in extract form, to make some of our modern medications. Around the world, still about 70-80% of the world depends on plants for healing. So it really is only the modern societies, Western societies, that use predominantly pharmaceuticals. So of course, commonly used, and now, of course, we're in this group in Western modern society where we're starting to get a bit more enlightened, so to speak, and so we're starting to look more back at the old methods of healing and looking more in terms of what plants can do for us. So why do we use herbs? What are some of the reasons we do so? So, well, for starters, we use the whole herb. So rather than use extracted components or bits that we think might be helpful out of, we like to use the whole herb. There's a few exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking, that is true. And the reason is because we know that herbs in their whole form are different to how we respond to them than if they're extracted form. They're much safer that way. We also know that there's components within them now that work together and provide a much greater benefit. I always like to use the example of the white willow bark. Now, the white willow bark has a salicylic acid in it, which is a compound that we use to produce aspirin. Aspirin is now made synthetically, but that was one of the ways that we derived aspirin in the past. Now, if you take aspirin, you get lots of nice anti-inflammatory benefits. It will help with aches and pains, but it does something to your tummy. It really irritates the tummy, makes it quite inflamed. However, if you take the white willow bark, you're going to get the benefit that you would get from the aspirin, but it has protective properties on the stomach. So once you start pulling a herb apart, taking extracts out of it, you're actually going to change how that works and the healing that it brings, and it may actually cause side effects which you didn't want in the first place. So that's one of the reasons that we use herbs. We know that the whole form is a lot better than any single active constituent. Now, herbs are particularly useful for very chronic conditions in our society. I call them civilizational diseases, all the things that we see today, whether it's a bit of mild hypertension, some sugar imbalances that lead to diabetes, eczema, psoriasis, arthritis, hormonal issues. Herbs are really, really useful here. Even functional things such as irritable bowel syndrome, you may have heard that being going around. Things such as chronic fatigue, stress, mild mental health conditions, all of these respond really well to herbs. So another reason to include them if you can. So what I'm going to do now is actually take you through a bit of a whirlwind tour through herbs. By the way, this is like a contraction of about 8 talks that I do. So I'm basically picking out the most salient points so that you can get a bit of an idea. Happy to talk to you guys more about any of this stuff, though, at any times. So the categories of herbs, I've put them into 3 categories. So these are the powerful herbs I'm going to look at first. They have very strong and almost instant actions. They can be very toxic and dangerous. So I would say that if you're going to practice this for yourself, please don't use the powerful herbs. And even generally speaking, I wouldn't use these herbs in a practice for natural therapy. Some examples here on that screen there, some pictures. If you can probably see the top there, that's a belladonna. Across from that, you've got the hemlock, and down the bottom, you've got the foxglove. So they're 3 herbs. In fact, we have some derivatives of these in modern medicine. For instance, the foxglove is what we used or originally used to make Decoction, which is one of the heart failure medications. So it's derived synthetically now, but the foxglove was used for that. So we want to avoid using these ones. Generally speaking, they're also on what we call this poisons schedule in Australia, which means you actually can't use them or prescribe them. Only doctors can. Then you've got the mid-range herbs. So these lie somewhere in between the 2, the most powerful and the gentle herbs. They do interact with some medications, and they can be toxic if taken incorrectly or used inappropriately. So you do have to be cautious with these and really know their interactions and their safety issues. Some of these are also on the poison schedule, not the examples that are up there. So the 2 plants up there, the top one up there is actually the licorice, and the second plant down there is a St. John's wort. So both of those are mid-range herbs. I wouldn't recommend that you use these per se unless you really know or really understand these herbs deeply. So use very cautiously. Now these are gentle herbs. These are the ones that you can use pretty freely from your backyard. So they're very nice, they're very easy, non-toxic, they aren't scheduled at all, so you don't have to worry about whether or not you're using something that only doctors are allowed to prescribe. They're very, very safe. I mean, it's still possible to abuse them. You don't want to have gallons of this stuff. But certainly they're nice, gentle herbs. So examples up there, if you're going across the screen there, you've got your chamomile, you've got your peppermint, and your echinacea. So I'm going to go through some of these herbs in a bit more detail later. So how do we use herbs? Well, of course, fresh or dried. So you can use your herbs straight from the garden, or you can preserve them and dry them. And I'm actually going to teach you how to make these, infusions or decoctions, which are a type of tea. So those are the ways that you would use your herbs from your garden. Those are the methods. Now, in terms of what I would use in terms of my practice, as a herbalist, I use liquid extracts, which uses the whole herb, and it basically they put this through a process into a solvent, and you make sort of about 1 gram per 1 ml of the solution. Now, there's a whole range of formulas and all that sort of stuff that go into all of this, so it's not something that you would have to know. It's quite complex. So there's whole pharmacopoeias that are set out about how to use these. So I don't want you to worry about that, but that's just explaining how else we can use them. So fresh or dried or a version of the tea is all you need to do. Another one is tinctures. Again, this is not available to the general public, and it definitely has recipes of how they're to be made safely. They are a lot weaker than the liquid extracts, and are usually used for a lot more potent herbs. So both of those, though, the liquid extracts and the tinctures, will have shelf lives of many years, whereas the teas are only short-lived. But still, they're the better ones to use in your home garden. Extracted components. So before I said we rarely use herbs in an extracted form. There are some examples where that's not the case, such as Ginkgo biloba, but they are pretty rare. Essential oils. Now, essential oils have their place, But remember, they are a processed part of the herb. They're taking the actual oil out of it. So it is a highly concentrated and potentially very dangerous part of the plant to use if you use it inappropriately. Even just 1 ml of these essential oils from some of these plants is a lethal dose for a human person to ingest. So just remember, essential oils, don't use these unless you know very well how to use them. Never use them orally. So don't take them. You can potentially use them in a diffuser or in very, very, very diluted forms on your skin to absorb. So generally speaking, if you're using essential oils topically, that means on your skin, you don't want to have any more than about 1 to 3% of that oil in another oil such as coconut oil. So be cautious with those. I wouldn't recommend them particularly to use them unless you have a lot of knowledge on how to use them safely. Tablets, so that's basically just putting a dried form of the herb into a capsule form or into a compressed tablet form. Perfectly safe to use if you're buying them, for instance, from a herbal shop or a health food shop where they've got most of those sorts of things in tablet form. Very convenient, a lot easier to use if you don't have the time to make teas. And of course, we can also put them into ointments or lotions or creams and things like that, and there's lots of beautiful recipes out there. This is a quite safe way to use your herbs, and there's some fantastic ways you can use this to treat all sorts of wounds and eczema and psoriasis, for instance, or even just if you've got arthritic joints. It's a nice thing to use some of those, even like a St. John's wort on your joints, fantastic to help with some of the pain. So just some cautions that I will say here. Remember that these plants are still a type of medication if you want to put it into that context. They do still have active ingredients within them, so you do have to be cautious. And remember, there's some general rules I'll give you if you want to use them. These are the things that I would tell you. Stick to the gentle herbs, that's first and foremost. If you want to go into a bit more detail, get some training or do a bit of research. There's still some good information out there and some courses that you can do. Ask a herbalist if you're unsure before you use something. Now, the people that you really want to avoid treating, and I don't even treat these people. So very young children, I generally don't treat children under the age of 6. Pregnant, breastfeeding women, you don't treat them at all. You know, the metabolism changes and you don't know the effect on the fetus. But also those who are particularly frail or those who have lots of complex medical conditions and medication regimes. So there's lots of complexities there. You may get into trouble in terms of interactions with that. So they're the people that you want to avoid. Pretty much everyone else, it's pretty safe to try some of those gentle herbs on. So I don't know if you can see this very clearly. So I'm going to talk about growing herbs. Now, if there's anything that is as easy or totally forgiving, that is herbs. So if you haven't got a green thumb, herbs are a great place to start. They are weeds. And that is my little greenhouse that I put up during the drought to try and protect some of my herbs. So that's what mine looked like. So I had some in there and they were all growing in pots. The other beautiful thing about herbs is you don't need fantastic soil. They pretty much can grow anywhere as long as they have some soil. They can survive in some of the poorest of soil. So, like I said, it's one of the easiest things. Now, the other reason that I put most of my herbs in pots is because they are like weeds, they will take over. So wherever you plant them, they will take over that spot. So it's often best to keep them in a confined area so that you can keep an eye on how far they spread and keep them clipped back to where they need to be. Most herbs will require a lot of sun, but there's a few exceptions that don't. So you do need a sunny spot as well. That's my veggie garden, which also had some of my herbs growing in there as well. So out in the open. So they were the ones that we didn't need a pot for very long because they might have been annual. So you're in and out within a few months. So I usually put those sort of herbs in there. I found some other designs of people's gardens though, some herb gardens, so you can see there. Lots of people do like to grow them in a bit of a circular pattern. It's just some creative ways of doing that. But I have a word of warning. If you like growing herbs, it's very addictive. I think I got to about 230 at one stage with my herb garden, my medicinal herb garden. So, harvesting herbs. So growing, very simple, nothing complex about that. So when to harvest, I've got you a little chart up there of when to do it. So obviously the fruits, you want to do them at the time when they're the most ripe. Flowers, just when they begin to bloom. So at the early stage of blooming, you don't want to get them in their late stages. Leaves, again, in that early blooming period. The stems after the leaves appear but before flowering, so that's the ideal to get those. The roots and rhizomes a bit under the ground. Autumn or even the beginning of spring right through that area, those two areas. The bark is definitely in early springtime if you need to harvest those, and then the seeds, that's when the flowers are fading and you're getting all those ripe seeds coming out. So there is your harvesting time. Now, preserving the herbs, of course you can use them fresh, but often if you're getting a whole lot of herbs at once, you're going to need to find a way to preserve them. I have done this. I have chopped up my herbs with a little bit of water or whizzed them up in a blender and put them with a bit of water and then just frozen them in ice cubes. Basil doesn't do too well with this, so that's probably one that you wouldn't use, but pretty much most of the other herbs, the leafy herbs and things like that, do really well in a little frozen cube like that. Then you can just pop them out, store them in the container and use them when you need to. Drying, that's the next favourite one of doing it. So the principles here, keep them out of direct sunlight. People put them in a shady area, but it's still relatively warm. You don't want it too cold. You can dry herbs in a colder area, it just takes a lot longer. Make sure it's well ventilated and a dust-free environment. And there's lots of ways you can do this. You can do this by, just having a drying rack. And that's best for the very fragile herbs, where you can get a bit of even just an old fly screen. Make sure it's clean and put your very fragile herbs on those quite thinly and let that dry out. Another option is to hang them upside down, so they're the more robust herbs, but keep the clumps small, because if you make them too big, they don't dry so well. Another option too, particularly for things like roots and stems and things like that, putting them in a very, very low oven, so about 35 degrees Celsius, and just letting them dry out in that low oven for a short period of time. For the hanging upside down and the drying on the racks, it takes about 1 to 2 weeks, depending on your weather. But that's, some simple ways you can do it. Now, to store the herbs afterwards, again, the things that are the enemies to storing your herbs are light, moisture, and too much heat. So you want them in a cool spot, out of sunlight, and make sure it's nice and dry. Get a sealed container. If you don't, if there's a lot of light in your house, maybe put them in the dark amber glasses to keep the sun off them. And that's some ways that you can preserve your herbs. And look, they can last up to 12 months in that state. So, how to prepare a decoction, and I think I may have mentioned this earlier in the week in a question, but I'll go through the recipe again. So a decoction is for the hard parts of your plant. So this is the roots and the barks or the rhizomes as well under the ground. So you basically get your ingredients together, your finely divided fresh or dried bits of your botanicals, and then you get some distilled purified water. Then you put the water and the part of your plant into the pot, bring it to the boil, simmer it down to about over half the original volume, and that usually takes somewhere about 15 to 30 minutes to do that. So that's how you use your hard herbs, so you're boiling it in the water itself to get the active components out of it. You can't store it, so you will have to use it the same day. If you don't want to actually drink the hard stuff, obviously strain it and then just drink the fluid throughout the day. Always use within the same day. So an infusion then is for the soft parts. This is the flowers and the leaves, for example. So these you have to be a lot more gentle with. So again, just take your dried botanical or your fresh and your purified water. By the way, just using bottled water is easy, or if you've got a filter, that's fine. You don't actually have to have completely distilled and purified. Again, similar method, but this time you boil the water separately and you pour it over the soft part of your herb and let it sit there for up to 30 minutes. Usually 15 minutes is more than sufficient, occasionally stirring it. So completely different. Don't boil the soft parts, only boil the hard parts. It's just boiling water over the soft parts. Again, the same principle applies. Strain it through a strainer if you don't want to drink the actual hard parts of the herb. Drink it throughout the day. So if you are doing a combination of herbs where it has both roots or hard parts of the herb and the soft parts of the herb of a different plant, it's okay to grind the root or the bark or the rhizome down to a powder. And then you can treat it as you would a soft part of the plant. So you'd throw the powder and the soft part of the herbs into a cup and pour the boiling water over it. So that's an easy way if you're doing a combination of herbs in one sitting. All right, right, so let's go through some of the herbs. Now, most of these you will be able to grow very easily in your backyard. There are a couple of examples where you won't, but I've only included them because they are so important to the system that we're looking at. So the first one up there is your Astragala. So we're looking at immunity here. So a beautiful deep immune stimulator. So this works at a deep level, not a superficial level, works over a long period of time. A long history in the Chinese medicine, but certainly being embraced in the Western medicine as well. It does a lot of different aspects of the immune system, very useful for treating those who have lots of issues with colds and flus and, generally speaking, don't have great immune system to fight this all off, very susceptible. I use it a lot for people who've had glandular fever, Ross River fever, chronic fatigue syndrome, for instance. Works really, really well on that, or recurrent cold sores that people get around their lips, etc. Works really well for that as well. Now, the other thing is there's some research that's shown that it has some promising effects in cancer treatments. So it does improve their 5-year survival by including astragalas. Here you definitely use the root, so you have to harvest the root for this plant. The next one across from that, again, comes from the similar sort of, I think the Chinese or Ayurvedic medicine, I can't remember which one it was. It's a very strong, bitter annual herb, so you can harvest this one using the above ground parts and obviously just reseed it for the next year. Really, really a good immune stimulator again, the lymphocytes, natural killer cells, all of these things are part of the immune system. Very broad spectrum activity against lots of viruses, influenza, hepatitis, cold sore viruses, wart viruses, even some HIV and SARS-CoV-2 as well. So a really nice herb to treat lots of those things. The next one across there is the Echinacea. You don't use the flower here, you do use the root. So when you harvest it, make sure you reseed it again. This is another leader in the immunity herbs, but it's called a superficial stimulator. So this one works quite quickly to help with those colds and flus through winter. It has both antiviral and antibacterial properties. Really good for respiratory tract infections, tonsillitis, throat infections, pharyngitis, as both treatment and prevention, particularly through those winter months. I have also used it in skin infections and it works really well as well. The next one across there is your elderberry. Now here you're using the flower and not the berry itself. In fact, don't eat the berries. It can cause quite a lot of severe nausea and may even be toxic if you have too many of them. So it's shown to directly inhibit viruses going into the cells and replicating. So a fantastic one to have through those winter months. It will enhance the immune system in a number of ways against viruses in particular. Really good for chest congestion in coughs and respiratory tracts. Great as a throat gargle as well. So if you've got a sore throat, it works well too. Garlic. So garlic will come up a couple of times today. It always does. Make sure you have some in your garden at all times. Lots and lots of things. Antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, you name it, it has some fantastic properties. Very good in colds, flus, bronchitis, nasal congestion. And we also know that if you have a diet that's rich in garlic, you're going to actually reduce your risk of getting cancer overall. So it tends to lose its benefits. We have talked about this before if it's crushed or heated for too long. So if you're using it medicinally, raw is best, and obviously having it quite quickly. If you're chopping it, you have to eat it almost instantly. Otherwise, just putting it in your mouth and letting your teeth do the crushing. The next one on that list is the horseradish, and you're using the root there. Some beautiful antiseptic properties with this one, both gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. So which both of those are bad forms of bacteria that we can get with those. It also has another benefit, and that it stimulates circulation. And that's often the case with these herbs. You'll see them come up kind of multiple times because herbs often have multiple benefits. Just a caution on that, if you have any thyroid issues, you don't want to overdo that one because it can cause the thyroid to become a bit more underactive. And also, if you've got any gut issues, sometimes it can irritate the gut. So that one, just take a bit of caution with that. Now, thyme, I've included this one here. Definitely a favourite. Good one to use, obviously, for all your culinary dishes, but fantastic both antibacterial and antifungal and antiviral properties. In fact, it has more than 20 antiviral compounds within the leaf itself. It's also a really fantastic throat gargle, great for coughs, so any of those chronic dry coughs that you might have, it's a fantastic one to include. And this one you can use in your cooking, or you can make a thyme tea. Lots of simple ways. You can do that fresh or dried. By the way, thyme oil, the essential oil, extremely toxic. And that's one of the ones that only 1 ml of that will kill you. So don't ever use thyme oil, the essential oil that is, as the medicinal form of that herb. So cardiovascular health, those who are here for this talk as well, will see some of these from there. So you've got your olive leaf there that can help lower the blood pressure and also help with some of your blood fats, garlics, onions, and that would also include the leeks, anything in that family there. Really, really good for preventing atherosclerosis, or the build-up of fats in your blood vessel. It helps to lower the blood fats overall. Really good at helping to lower blood pressure. And can help thin the blood a little bit too, to keep that blood going nice and smoothly. Hawthorne berries. Here the flowers are actually a bit more potent than the berries themselves. Just make sure you don't overdose on this one. Has a really good long tradition as a heart tonic, and I'll just put these down as a reminder for those who are here. This will be repetitive, but for those who won't. So it improves blood flow through the coronary blood vessels, the heart blood vessels. It improves contraction of your heart muscle, protects the heart muscle from damage, helps with abnormal heart rhythms, lowers blood pressure and cholesterol, but it can interact with some heart medications, so always check if you are taking heart medications, although I strongly recommend this one if you've got a heart condition. Check with your doctor first just to make sure. If you have very low blood pressure, probably shouldn't take that one either. So the next one on that list is Ginkgo biloba. This is one that you can grow this one in your yard, but you just can't use it. They do need to do an extract with this one. The whole form is not safe. So here you're using a Ginkgo biloba extract. And the reason I put this one on there, it is just such a great herb and certainly a wonderful one to use as supplement, particularly if there's any circulation issues that you might have, any problems with blood flow. That includes through the brain and through the heart or your blood vessels. It's a wonderful one that does provide some definite benefits. Some good research behind that one. The next one there is the globe artichoke. So for those who enjoy the artichoke, we're not actually talking about the flower head here, which is what most people would consume. Here it's actually the leaves and the stems, and potentially even the root can provide some benefit, but definitely the leaves, which is much more potent. So really promising results in terms of reducing cholesterol. As a bonus, this one works really, really well as well in liver and gallbladder issues. So a fantastic one to include in your salads as well, those leaves, the globe artichoke. And it also, as another bonus, can help lower blood sugars as well. So you can see the benefits of some of these herbs are kind of in multiple effects, and this is definitely one of them. The last one on that list is the Bergamot Orange, and here we're talking about both the juice and the skin, so that all provides the benefits. So the research is showing great effect on the blood fats. It reduces the bad kinds and increases the good kinds. So it also acts as a bit of a metabolic switch, so to speak, and it helps break down sugars and fats as well. It improves circulation in all your small, tiny little blood vessels. Also protective against what we call fatty liver, which is a really common thing we're seeing these days. It also blocks cholesterol absorption in the gut. So that's a really nice one to have there if you've got any sort of cardiovascular issues or history in your family. So herbs in gut health, we haven't talked much about this week, but this is a big issue. And so I've actually included quite a few on this list. Now, all of these on this list you can grow very easily in your yard except for the slippery elm. But don't worry too much about that one. I'll come back to that in a minute. So the peppermint, and here we're talking about the leaf, fantastic to use either fresh or dried. A big leader in the treatment of any gut issues. Really wonderful calming benefits. Helps to relieve any spasms, bloating, digestive upsets, colic, nausea, wind, all of these things peppermint is wonderful for. It also helps to enhance digestion as well. So if you're feeling a bit sluggish in the gut, peppermint is a wonderful one to add in there. Now chamomile, here we're talking the flower. Again, another leader in the pack, very, very similar to the peppermint. So it does all the same sort of things to the gut. It also has another benefit, and that's on the mind. So it's a nice calming agent for the mind, helps with tension, headaches, any insomnia, all those sorts of things. It's wonderful to use chamomile. So generally speaking, if you've got gut issues, I would suggest using peppermint of a morning because it's a nice stimulating one for the mind and for getting things going. And then in the evening, using your chamomile. So the same effect on the gut, but the peppermint will wake you up of a morning. The chamomile will help you sleep better at night. So You can use them in that order, or you can just use them both together. So the next two on that list are the slippery elm and the marshmallow. So here, the reason I've lumped these two together is slippery elm is becoming harder and harder to get. It is derived from the bark of a tree, and these trees are basically being decimated by the industry. So we're probably going to have to move more towards the marshmallow, which has almost identical properties, and here you use the root primarily, but you can use the leaf as well. So these are both providing what we call mucilage, which is a type of very soothing thing that happens to the gut. If there's any sort of inflammation or ulcers, it will settle that down. Interestingly, it can work in both directions. So if you've had gastroenteritis, for instance, and had a lot of diarrhea and all those sorts of things, it's a nice soothing one to have after that. Conversely to that, if you have constipation issues, it fixes that as well. So it's a great normalizer for your gut, a great soother, a great normalizer. So I always recommend having some of this in your home, for its benefits are beautiful. It also helps to soothe conditions such as urinary tract infections, or if you had a very raspy, harsh cough, it just provides soothing benefits. For some reason, even though it's not going into the lungs or into the bladder, it has that reaction in both those areas. So marshmallow root or slippery elm bark. The next one on that list there is ginger, another one of those herbs that has a multiplicity of effect. I could have put that into the immune slide as well. It definitely has some immune boosting properties. But we do know that this root is really particularly helpful for digestive complaints, any wind, bloating, nausea, any sort of sluggishness in the gut. It's a fantastic way of just stimulating the gut a bit and doing that. Now, you do have to be careful with ginger in terms of how much. Most you want to have is about 3 to 6 grams per day. Anything more than that can actually cause inflammation of the tummy. So if you have stomach ulcers or anything like that, I wouldn't recommend this as your first line. I'd probably go more towards your chamomile and your slippery elm or marshmallow root. The next one on that list is meadowsweet, beautiful little plant. Here you're using the flowers and the leaves. So it's a very soothing and healing herb for your gut. Very, very, very good in reflux or gastroesophageal reflux disease, as we call it. So too much acid, again, it's a great normalizer for that acid in your tummy. Now that bay leaf there, very, very popular in Europe, particularly in Portugal. My husband loves his bay leaves. It's also called the laurel, depending on where you are in the world. Here you can use both the leaves and the fruit, although primarily we use the leaves. It's a really good digestive, so it helps digestion, particularly of really heavy protein foods, which is why a lot of Europeans use it with their meat dishes. It also helps with wind, so it's a great addition to any of your really hearty or heavy soups and sauces. If you're using a lot of beans or things like that, lentils, throw some bay leaves in just to help with that digestion. Interestingly, by the way, the oil of the berries is fantastic for rubbing on arthritic joints as well. The last one on that list there is the dandelion root. So don't get mixed up here with the leaf here. We're talking the root. So it's a nice long taproot bit that you can see at the bottom there. Great liver and digestive tonic. Really helps that promote that bile production and liver drainage. It's really good for chronic constipation as well. So every one of those herbs outside the slippery elm are very, very easy to grow. You can't kill these plants. They are just very robust. They are weeds. So the next one is looking at what we call the urinary system. So that's our bladder and all the bits and pieces that go around the bladder from the kidneys right through the outside passages. So the first one on there is actually corn silk. So this is the stuff that you normally peel off the corn and throw away. But that corn silk has some amazing complex chemistry behind it, but very, very soothing. Any sort of inflammation in that urinary tract, from right the way from the kidneys right down to the bottom. So we're talking anything with urinary tract infections, kidney stones, you name it. You want to have some corn silk on hand if you can. And the greener corn silk is a little better than the really dark brown stuff. The next one on there is the buku, and you use the leaves here. So another major urinary tract antiseptic. So it covers a whole range of bugs that can get in there, including E. coli, which is the most common cause of urinary tract infections. It can be used both with recurrent and chronic infections to help prevent that, and also infections in the prostate as well. The next one on that list is actually the Cooch grass rhizome. So that grass that you grow on your lawn called Cooch grass, the rhizome underneath has some wonderful, wonderful properties to help you. Again, very complex chemistry behind it, but again, a very soothing herb to use for the urinary tract. Any sort of pain or spasms that you might get there, it's really helpful for that. Also has some antibiotic properties as well, so great for using when you've got bladder infections or anything like that. So the Cooch crumb and corn silk work really well together. The next one on the list is actually cranberry. Now, this is commonly used to prevent urinary tract infections, and I would never recommend that you take it while you have a urinary tract infection. What its job does is it actually stops the bacteria from adhering or sticking to the wall of your bladder and causing the infection. So if you've already got an infection, the cranberry is not going to do much for you except make it more stingy and hurt. If you don't like the cranberry, or you obviously prefer not to take cranberry supplements, they've got lots of sugar, blueberries work just as well. So if you like blueberries better than cranberries, you can use that as an option. The next one on that list is actually the dandelion leaf. So before we discussed the root, now we're talking about the leaf. So it's a gentle, what we call diuretic. It helps to flush the fluids through your kidneys and out of your urinary tract there. So fantastic for helping to prevent urinary tract infections. So people who've got lots of issues with getting recurrent urinary tract infections, I would really encourage them to use the dandelion leaf on a daily basis to keep their kidneys and bladder flushed. If you're on really strong diuretics though, that might be a difficult one to use. It'll make it a little bit worse. The last one on that list is a saw palmetto. Now, I've never actually grown this one, so I can't give you any advice on growing, but I've included it on the list because it is a #1 herb that we use for prostate disease. So very, very effective in the early stages. Up to 90% of men who've got just the beginning stages of prostate enlargement will get improvement in their symptoms. So this is a nice one to include there. Improves the frequency of urination and the flow rate, any sort of retention issues of not able to get the urine out. All of those things are helped by that herb, so it's a really good one. Now, herbs for the nervous system. So this is more mental health herbs. And we've looked at some of these already in my talks, but I'll just go over these again. So the first one is the passion flower. You use any of the plant that's above ground. So it's not just the flower itself, but the leaves, anything that's above the ground there is useful. Stunning vine, of course, so you can grow it just for being pretty. But it's a fantastic sedative, so something that calms you down in the nervous system, specifically the best one to use for insomnia. But it also just helps if you're generally restless or a bit irritable, any sort of pain or nerve pain. It's a fantastic one to add in there as well. The next one there is the skull cap, and again you use just the above ground parts. It's also a nice sedative, nice calmative for the nervous system, restorative. It particularly helps where there's lots of nervous tension, anxiety, exhaustion, any sort of debility in that regard with the brain. The Valerian here, you use the roots. So it's a very well-known, gentle, tranquilizing herb. So it doesn't quite work like the normal tranquilizers that we have medications, a lot more gentle than that. So really helpful for both anxiety and insomnia. It combines beautifully with the skull cap and the passion flower. By the way, I've grown all of these herbs and they are extremely easy to grow. The next one on that list is the oats, and here I'm talking about the green head of the oat, not necessarily the actual porridge, although that will give you some benefit. Very old-fashioned herb. It was the primary one that we've used to treat depression for the last few centuries, and it works really well in mild depression. Next one on that list is the Damiana. Here you again use the leaves, the above-ground parts. Another restorative for your nervous system. Really good when you've got lots of anxiety, exhaustion, stress, all of those things. It's also a bit of an aphrodisiac as well. The last one on that list is your Withinia. So this is a really nice calming tonic herb. Really, again, good for the stress, tension, and anxiety. And as I've mentioned before, this one's really good for post or perimenopausal women who are getting a lot of mental health issues. Withinia is a beautiful one to add into that. Then we're going to move into the musculoskeletal system. So this is where all your joints and aches and pains come into play. The first one on that list there is actually the celery, and the seed's the most potent part. It helps to kind of give you a more alkaline system. It takes some of the acid out of your system, particularly uric acid actually. Fantastic for all arthritic conditions. So any form of arthritis or gout or anything like that, I really, really would recommend this one. And it's particularly combines well with dandelion. Actually, dandelion will enhance the role of your celery seed. The next one on that list I've mentioned earlier in this talk was the white willow, the bark here. Obviously, this one's not so easy to grow, so if you're going to use it, probably best to actually buy this herb as a dried herb. But this is my favourite anti-inflammatory herb. This works really well for a whole lot of different kinds of arthritis, beautiful pain-relieving benefits. Even if you get just an acute back pain, this is a nice one that works gently but relatively efficiently. And that's the one that we used to get aspirin from. Next one on that list is the curcumin. Now, we talked a little bit about the better form of curcumin being thuracumin, which is more easily absorbed. It is what I would call a modern herb and modern natural anti-inflammatory. But just, be careful with this one if you've got stomach complaints. Even though it does work well, if it's absorbed well in the right form, to help with any sort of inflammation in your joints. If you have stomach issues, just remember this is still a spice, and it can irritate your gut for those who are susceptible. The next one's actually got a very unfortunate name, but it's a beautiful herb. Devil's claw. So you're actually using that tuber bit, which looks very unattractive, but it's very effective at both anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving benefits. Very good for both rheumatoid and osteoarthritis and gout as well. It's also good for generalised muscle aches and pains. Now, I usually would combine this one with your celery and the next one along the list, which is the bog bean. This herb, the devil's claw, can also lower your blood sugars quite significantly, so if you have diabetes, you do have to use that one with caution. The bog bean here, you use the leaves. It's a very bitter herb, but it's fantastic for rheumatoid arthritis, any sort of arthritis actually, but anything that's chronically inflamed or even some of the autoimmune-based arthritises, fantastic. It works really well. Meadowsweet, here this one we did mention before in the context of your gut, in terms of particularly treating reflux disease, but its flowers and leaves are fantastic as well in your musculoskeletal system. Also good for arthritis and any sort of inflammation in your joints, but specifically indicated for rheumatoid arthritis. And that's the end of my talk, although I just will say I haven't put any dosages or ranges on those herbs. Generally speaking, it's difficult to say depending on how you're using it. If you're using dried herbs, usually in the order of about 1 to 3 grams per day. You can push that up a little higher for some of the safer herbs. In terms of using them fresh, you sometimes have to double or even triple the doses because you've got the water in it. So it depends how you use it as to how much, whether you're using it fresh or dried, as to how much you actually need. For those who are interested, I've got a really good resource I can show you after the talk about, how the book actually has in there the dried dosages for a lot of these herbs. So if you'd like to, afterwards, you can come and have a look at that. Any questions or queries? Yes. It pretty much can grow in any soil that you want, really. They can grow in the poorest of soil. So in mine, I just got some old-fashioned potting mix because that's all I had available and put them in my pots. In terms of fertilising and things like that, I just used worm wee. So I have my own worm farm, used to drain the worm wee out, dilute it down to about 10%, and probably about once every 3 or 4 months, gave each one a little squirt of worm wee, and that was enough to keep them growing. They're very, very hardy. They don't require a lot of care. But yes, no particular special soil, unless, of course, there's some herbs that you do better in growing in water and things like that, then you have to be a bit more specific. But for the vast majority, they grow in some of the worst soils possible. So pretty much, if you're going to grow them in pots, any sort of potting mix will be fine. Yeah, nothing particular. That's correct. So licorice falls into the mid-range herbs, so it's not on the really safe ones. So yes, it does interact with those who've got blood pressure issues. It can cause fluid retention as well. So if you've got issues with fluid, particularly with heart conditions and things like that, you wouldn't want to use licorice. So that's probably one that I wouldn't recommend that you use it unless you are a herbalist using it for specific conditions. It's in that mid-range. Same with St. John's wort. So both of those are in that mid-range herb. If you're using backyard herbs, they're not ones to include. Yeah, so licorice has almost like a steroid component to it. It's similar to it. It's not exactly the same, but it has a similar sort of effect on your body's hormones and what happens as well. So that's the benefit that we get from it, but also is the adverse reaction that we can get, particularly if people have got some other conditions it doesn't mix well with. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, you go, and then there's just one up there. Yeah.
Can you suggest something for respiratory conditions, like, when hay fever comes along?
Yes, nettle. Nettle's a nice one. So it's a nice, I wouldn't call it an antihistamine, but it has anti-allergy properties to it. Obviously, very careful when you're touching it. You'll get a sting from it, so just make sure you harvest it with gloves. But any sort of cooking will almost instantly get rid of those stinging aspects of it. But just making a nettle tea. It's a beautiful one for hay fever, all those sorts of things. Yeah. Upstairs, there was a question. Yeah, come and talk to me afterwards. I'll give you a list of things. I won't talk about them on the camera, obviously, for obvious reasons. But yes, for sure, I can let you know about, where you can get some courses and books and things like that. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, guys. Oh, no, one more. Yep. Would I treat COVID with herbs? Yes, absolutely. So pretty much all the immune herbs that I had listed there, so particularly fantastic ones, I would use things like thyme and garlic, which are very easily accessible. Certainly other ones are an option. I've even used St. John's wort sometimes for things like COVID because it's got antiviral properties, but they have interactions. So just stick to your things like thyme and garlic, which are straightforward herbs, nice antiviral properties. Fantastic for the Thyme Tea is fantastic for the coughs, so that's a beautiful one to use. Yeah. For some people it would have been. So one thing I found with COVID infections or the SARS-CoV-2 infection is that a lot of people are getting gut issues. A lot of nausea, some people have vomiting. I found that some of those herbs were a bit harsh on the tummy. So yes, not always can you use those things. If you just got sort of head cold symptoms, that the options of using cayenne and all those sorts of things are fine. But if you give that to someone whose stomach's not feeling too well with the SARS-CoV-2 infection, they might not like you for it. Yeah.
What herbs can you use for antiparasitic cleanse?
Garlic, that's one that does have some, but it depends what sort of parasite you're treating. Some parasites still need pharmaceuticals to actually get rid of them. Yeah.
What about wormwood?
Wormwood has some toxicity to it. I don't generally use it. I know that some people have recommended it, and black walnut as well. But yeah, there is some serious toxicity to wormwood. There have actually been recorded deaths from using wormwood. So we do have to be careful with that one. So generally speaking, no, I haven't used that. Black walnut possibly. Yeah, that may be a good one to use, yeah.
What would you recommend for someone with a lot of, usually in the mornings, mucus? It tends to come only in the mornings. Is there anything that can assist the flow out, any herbs or teas or anything? Yeah, so mucus of a morning, if it's not an allergy component, usually suggests a bit of silent reflux overnight. So obviously getting a bit of reflux overnight is going to irritate the airways, all those sorts of things. So I would probably start with using something like slippery elm or marshmallow root powder before you go to bed, because what you're trying to do is provide a protective coating to those areas, and also do a bit of normalising to your gut as well. So I would go gut first before you necessarily would go for something respiratory, because that's usually the cause of mucus in the morning, is some reflux overnight. So definitely you can use your peppermint, your chamomile throughout the day, some meadowsweet as well, another really good one just to help normalise your gut. And then obviously before bed, use your slippery elm powder or marshmallow root powder. Yeah. And by the way, with using slippery elm powder or marshmallow root powder, has everyone ever used it? There's a couple of people. So you can't just drink this stuff. It's quite intense.
What I normally do is get a heaped teaspoon or even a tablespoon if I'm feeling really like I need it, put it into a warmed beverage. So it doesn't have to be hot, but just room temperature beverage, whether it's your favourite soy or plant-based milk. Mix it up really quickly with a fork. So I'm talking quickly, you need to have this done within 30 seconds and then scull it. So you don't want to have a lot of fluid because you've got to get that down quickly because it will form a gel and then you'll have to eat it. So mix it in really quickly, scull it down, you're done. Yes. A book on growing herbs.
Yeah, or just, what we've looked at now. Just a plant book or whatever.
A plant book. I'd have to get back to you on that one of good ones. I know I've got a few at home. I can let you know of what I've used over the past, but to be honest, like I said, they're weeds. You don't really know a lot of knowledge on how to grow them. You need more knowledge on how to use them. But I'll have a look for you. Nothing off the top of my head, but yeah, I can have a look for you. Okay. I think you guys have had enough of me. I could be here all day. I'm too passionate about these things sometimes. But anyway, thank you for listening. More than happy to take questions afterwards, so feel free to come up.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel. Thank you, Rui, for having this extra time after your morning service and long week. They had a long week with us, and I hope you will have some rest during next week. We have still 1 hour and 30 minutes, 40 minutes, until Sabbath is over. But I reckon this day was long. We need some rest, so we should go home and